Hi, my name is Hannah, and today we will interview Robert. Based in New York City, he leads the tax practice at a national law firm. Today, he gave us his view on key trends as we emerge into a post-pandemic world.
This podcast channel is about you, successful international entrepreneurs, successful expats, successful investors. Sponsored by HCJ.tax.
And we're live. Good morning, Robert. How are you this morning?
Hi, Derren. We're all, well, I'm in New York, so I think the news here is fairly good. U.S., of course. Some of the rest of the country we're a little concerned about these days, frankly.
Absolutely. So could you introduce yourself to those that may be watching or listening to you on the podcast?
Sure. My name is Robert Kiggins, but commonly Bob. It depends where I am. Sort of the rest of the world, quite often it is Robert outside of the U.S. We tend to be a little informal here. But what I do is I'm a tax lawyer, and I'm actually the tax group practice leader at Culhane Meadows. The numbers change a lot. We've been growing. We're about a 75 attorney firm, a business firm. So we have 6 tax lawyers, of which I'm the practice group leader. We are scattered, isn't a very good term. We're located throughout the United States. So we have up and down the East Coast. So think, pretty much Boston all the way down to Washington, Atlanta. We have a big presence in Texas, Dallas, Houston, Austin, Chicago. We're probably expanding to Florida. That's a little bit uncertain now. And we're also looking at California just because we do get ourselves involved in tech. And we have a pretty large IP practice, intellectual property. And kind of California is a place where we think we want to be. Anyway, that gives you a good introduction.
Fantastic. And that's why I wanted to talk to you, because before remote working was a thing, you were doing it. So yourself, your practice, your team has been, at least within my ecosystem, you guys have been on the forefront. At least you personally have been on the forefront of remote work. So that's great. So now we are in a period of time where, and I'm sorry if I sound like a cliche, that's unprecedented, right? So this is unprecedented. We've never been here before. A lot is happening. What are your thoughts, given your vantage point and given what you do? What are your thoughts on trends that we need to pay attention to as we enter this new world?
Sure. Well, I mean, the big word on everybody's mind is, of course, the pandemic. And as you pointed out, in a sense, because my firm had been working online, doing things without bricks and mortar, that was the whole premise of the firm. We've been able to adapt very well to COVID without really missing a beat. So kind of the question is, if and when we get a handle on the pandemic, and I'm hopeful that we will as a human race, where do businesses go after that? Will business then revert to the way it was pre-COVID or COVID? I'm always mispronouncing it. And no one knows. That's a crystal ball type of question. But my own personal guess is that there will be some of the diminution of people actually working from offices, if not 24/7, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I think there's a few reasons for that. One is that as a cost of a business, bricks and mortar can be quite expensive. So if one doesn't need that, at least on a full-time basis, there's a cost-saving opportunity there. Another factor, I think, Derren, is at least here in New York City, a lot of people commute quite a ways to get to work quite frequently. It's a little bit expensive, although I don't think that's the main factor, but it can be very time-consuming. A lot of people will spend up to 2 hours, maybe more in some cases, but I don't think 2 hours each way is unusual. I live in a town called, it's a village, Portchester, New York, which I don't know, how much viewers are going to know New York City geography. But that's literally about an hour and a half train trip into Grand Central, which is, call it Midtown Manhattan. Mm-hmm. So each day myself, if I was commuting into the city, or people, I never have had to, but people around here, it's very, very common. We'll be spending, say, 3 hours a day, at least 2 hours a day, depends on the train schedule and the time, commuting. Mm-hmm. So I think people, to the extent that they're going to be given the opportunity to at least cut back on that, will grab it. So I don't think we're going to go back after COVID to the way we did business before. And there are other factors too, but I think that mostly answers your question, just with sort of my top of mind reactions to where I think things will be.
Okay, so that's in terms of how we work. But what else? What other trends do you see happening that it's worthwhile paying attention to? Oops, and I seem to have lost connectivity. I'm going to turn.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're back. Okay, great.
Okay, good. I see you all the time. So yeah. So I don't know how much we lost of the transmission. So the question was, well, what do I see besides work type trends coming out of the current environment we're living in? And I think another one that's related, the flip side of that, is leisure and housing, and what do people do with that? I think, again, this is just speculative. My dog is barking. I'm just going to close my door. This is the joy of doing things on Zoom. Honey, can you keep the dog down a little bit? One thing you're going to see is people's personal lives, maybe a little bit more, and it's not all bad. But there certainly is going to be something of a merging of the workplace into the home, I think, which we're absolutely doing right, live now. But sort of the other question is, well, what happens to real estate in large urban centers? Mm. And I think what happens, people still want to be together for all kinds of reasons, but maybe some of those reasons have diminished a little bit now. Mm. Certainly the work driver has diminished. There are advantages to a life not in a big city. Mm-hmm. Cost of living tends to be lower, if nothing else. Mm-hmm. I don't live in Manhattan, and if I did, my cost of living, I dare say, would go up by 50% a year. Mm-hmm. Everything is much, much more expensive. So I think there's going to be, if I was a genius speculator, I would speculate on residential real property located in suburban or even exurban areas around large metropolitan centers. Mm-hmm. Again, I could be dead wrong. And if I put money on it, it probably wouldn't pan out. I'm being pessimistic. No, seriously, I think we will see something of a trend of people perhaps moving away from the city. But the flip side of that is, well, what happens to office space that's no longer perhaps needed in cities? Mm. And there are people who do live in cities now who aren't necessarily living, we have a U.S. expression, I know you're from here, they're not living high off the hog, so to speak. A lot of people, unfortunately, are very marginalized. Yeah. And yet they're still living in cities. So at the same time as I have people in my mind moving out of the city, I also have people that are in the city that maybe have a shot now at affordable housing, but better housing than they live in now, from the conversion of office space that's not needed anymore into residential space, which is perhaps needed, even though I'm saying on the one hand you're going to see perhaps a decrease in population. There will not necessarily be a decrease in poverty or social inequality, which is a huge theme in this country too, as I'm sure you're well aware. So again, that may be another idea to convert office space that's no longer needed into affordable housing. Mm-hmm. So hopefully, there's an environmental aspect to it as well. I think that people have seen that during, and again, I'm no scientist or anything, I think people have seen that during COVID, there's been a reduction in emissions from vehicles, and the atmosphere, to some extent, is a little bit happier, if we can, personify an ecosystem. because there are not the same level of carbon emissions going into the atmosphere, given that there's quite a reduction in vehicular traffic from commuting. I mean, even here in New York City area, we have public transportation, so that in and of itself is probably environmentally good. But still, there's plenty of cars on the highway, which can pollute. And I think the big danger, not so much for you and I, but our children, is what's going to happen to the environment. So to the extent that we can cut down on greenhouse emissions from a reduction in commuting via vehicles, and another solution to that might be, of course, electric powered cars or so, whatever. But I think that'll be another thing that I'm looking for the silver lining in all this, I think, basically going forward. And that might be another thing that we'll see coming out of this that maybe will be a benefit. Admittedly, I'm a little bit whistling in the dark, and I'm a little bit looking for the silver lining in the cloud.
Okay, fair enough. You know what I've been quite curious about personally is the whole networking effect. So like, and this is something obviously you guys are way ahead of me on. So I've been living in Singapore for the past 7 years. So I work with private clients with international tax issues. So, but because the central business district within Singapore is so small, everybody knows each other. So I know all the tax lawyers, I know all the other tax accountants, I know the private bankers. We see each other in Starbucks. We see each other in the same bars after work. We go to the same seminars and conferences in the city. So there's that connectivity. Now, as we move to remote work, perhaps this is the new norm. How do you make and how do you sustain those kind of connections?
Well, actually, with someone like yourself, it hasn't changed a bit, because once you're working globally, it would be very rare that I'd be hopping over to Singapore. And yet, and probably, I know you got here to the States. In fact, we met here, probably a couple of years ago now, at least. But when you were staying downtown, and I think it was Soho. But that's one thing that's not going to change. But I'm being a little bit glib, obviously, because there are situations where I'm working locally too, and then how do I interface with those folks? And I don't think that communication or social networking on the internet is going to be a substitute for personal contact. I think once, and again, I'm optimistic that we will get past this disease. I'm very optimistic. I don't know why. I guess from what I'm reading, it looks like vaccines are being developed. There's even some hope. And again, I'm no epidemiologist. I'm no doctor. Maybe if we're lucky by the end of this year, which would be great. So, eventually one would think that it's going to be safe to meet with people face to face again. Just not maybe as necessary as it once was, because we have the new technologies. So yeah, I mean, I will, once things get back to normal, and it'll probably be a new normal, be meeting with people face to face, certainly, because at the end of the day, I think people do feel that there's no substitute for that, and I think that's true. There's real no substitute for an in-person type meeting, shaking somebody's hand when it's safe to do so again, and so on, because we're humans, we're social creatures. So we're not minds that kind of exist in a vacuum somewhere on the internet. I hope that answers it a little bit, gets to what you're talking about. But that's my plan. But I do find it also beneficial to have this technology and more people adopting it, because the problem I've always had, Derren, really, is in organizing on a more formal basis some sort of an event. And getting people to come is tricky, because they have to then travel. So that's not binary, though. I think you can have a meeting that's live and at the same time also have it taped for the internet. So, the word for the internet is the events are asynchronous, which means that you don't have to be at the same time of the event as to attend it later if it's recorded. So I like the idea of doing things both on the internet and a face-to-face type seminar, and also meetings with people that don't quite need to rise to the level of an in-person meeting. I certainly see those, but I think it'll be a combination of both, really. And I think a lot of people I think what COVID has done, and it's done a lot of horrible things, has made people more aware of the technology and how it can be integrated into another way to meet with and converse with people. I mean, what you and I are doing now, it's not as good, so to speak, as me coming to Singapore, or vice versa. But whoa, how long of a flight would we have? And again, this is an extreme case with you and I. Admittedly, geographically, we're probably about as far from Singapore here as you could be without moving to Mars or something. As long as you're on the Earth. But for more local situations like what you're talking about, I think that will revert. What we do here sometimes now too, in terms of even meeting with friends outside of the family. I mean, the families, we're together, we're in an enclosed space, hopefully we're all okay. What people are starting to do here is to meet with friends, but outdoors, at least now, while the weather is good, and maintain social distancing. So, there may be ways to do that. I think the move to indoors that's going to be more challenging. And again, I'm not an I can't even say the word, epidemiologist, but I think that indoor meetings, from everything I'm reading right now and understanding, I think the science is developing every day. It's a little soon for meeting face-to-face indoors in any kind of numbers. For example, how do I practice where I need documents signed. How do I do that? And I'd be a little uncomfortable, and eventually, quite apart from social things, how to do court proceedings. There's lots of issues that, that are, besides just doing business connections, how you actually function as a professional. And when you need to do things for clients, like get documents signed, how do you do that? And there are ways now that we're trying to do that here. It's a little bit cumbersome. So hopefully we'll get to the point where at least we feel comfortable sitting in a large enough room, far enough away from each other, with sufficient social distancing. And some people are comfortable with that already. I'm not one of them. But some people are comfortable enough with that already to do things that way. But like here in New York State, we can, I think courts are opening up slowly, but with lots of safeguards. How that will work out, I think it's still an experiment. How a meeting, with friends like what you're talking about would work out here would be very much of an experiment. We're seeing here, and unfortunately we're seeing it now in the Southwest, like states like Texas, Florida come to mind, California, where things did open up, and unfortunately the virus has sort of seized on that. I don't think the virus has a mentality, it just does what it does. Has seized on that as an opportunity to transmit. And now, as you know, we've got a record number of cases every day in the United States. I don't even know, Jared. I would ask you this. Could I even travel to Singapore now, or would I be banned?
So
I know there are countries that I think are banning Americans right now. I am pretty sure of that.
You need to get permission in advance of travel, and the answer may probably be on the no side. So you apply through a website, and then in a couple days they give you an email reply. So unless you were like a permanent resident or something, then the answer is probably going to be no. But in terms of the point that you raised earlier with the courts, so my son is in law school in Miami, and he is doing a clerkship with a judge, and he's explaining to me that a lot of the proceedings are now happening on Zoom or happening online. So, and documents are being signed with DocuSign, Adobe DocuSign, and so I'm wondering whether, on the flip side, we may actually see an advance or some efficiency gains as we leverage technology in spaces that perhaps we were a bit nervous about previously. But now, do we let the court system back up? Probably not. Let's get on with it. And even though we come out on the tail end of this, and there's a vaccine, there's whatever, that those efficiency gains, as I like to term them, by leveraging technology, they will be sustained. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that, I only have one reservation, because I basically agree with all that. The difficulty is the destination, the goal, I think we'll get there. the journey can be a little rough.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is that I've worked online and through the internet for many years now. And my sense is that, yes, a lot of the stuff is growing and it's getting better and more capable, but it's a very rough journey because a lot of the algorithms really are not very good yet. I think there needs to be, I don't know how you quite do this, because programs are clearly released that are not quite ready for prime time, and increasingly so. But that's a challenging issue because, do you wait to release a program till it's dead on 100% perfect? And I just pose that as a question. Apparently, that's almost an impossible thing to do because of the complexity of everybody's configurations. I'm sure, for example, the configuration you have with your hardware and your software is somewhat different than mine. So just because technology was released that would work for me, it might not work for you. In fact, it might cause you a lot of problems, and then vice versa. And I don't know, Derren, if there's any way really to test that to a 100% certainty. So what do you do if I'm a software company or I'm a programmer? Do I say, okay, I'm going to release something because I'm 98%, it'll work in 98% of the cases. And not that you can be that precise, but there's going to be some level, I think, or you'd never release it, at which some of it just isn't going to work. It might even cause problems for users. So I think that's the big challenge, is kind of for the programmers and the computer industry and the software industry and to some extent hardware, although I don't think hardware tends to fail that much. It's more the complexity of the algorithms, I think, which are increasingly complicated because what they're asked to do is increasingly complicated. How do we work that so that as technologies roll out, they don't cause, in some cases, more harm than good? I think that's going to be the big challenge.
Okay, definitely. But as you pointed out, and as you have been a living example, it is possible. It is quite definitely possible to develop a thriving professional services practice done 100% remotely and have clients not just domestically but internationally. So, yeah, we will all figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we will all figure it out.
Yeah, I think so. And it's like anything else. I mean, look, when they first came out with automobiles, you had to be a mechanic.
Yeah.
No one could drive a car in 1920 that I know of. I'm not that old. But from what I understand, having to constantly repair it and fix it and know a lot about cars. We are kind of maybe a little bit past that, but not that much. I would say for a person wanting to go whole hog, without the support of an IT department into this brave new world, it's going to be a challenge. And there are ways to make that challenge easier. For example, I contract with an outside computer support group. I would say to anybody, contemplating leaping into, an all digital, all online practice, that's, unless you happen to be a computer science major or something, and most of us aren't, that kind of support is really essential, and it has been for me. I mean, I'll give you an example. One thing I do is tax law, and I will actually prepare. I do more compliance probably than most tax lawyers, so I will be doing the occasional return, believe it or not, for somebody, which is relatively unusual for a tax attorney. That tends to be more the province of accountants. But my practice developed that way because I was in-house to a large corporate group here in the United States, and I just started doing their group income tax returns, which are fairly complicated. And it was actually a mixed group, so I'm going to get a little wonky on you. There was a life insurance arm, and there was just sort of a non-life insurance arm. And the consolidation, you don't consolidate, generally speaking, a life-type company with non-life. So it was a complicated return, and I was able to learn how to do it and get good software that enabled me to do it. So in my case, I kind of got baptized into doing that. But the point isn't so much, okay, complicated stuff, great. Now, I had a computer issue, which knocked out my I had thought, by the way, that my data, I'm going to get a little technical. I thought my data, it's okay, even though my hard drive got funky. That's a technical term, funky hard drive, meaning one that doesn't work anymore. I thought, it's okay, my data is stored out on the cloud. That was not a very wise assumption on my part. My data was not stored out on the cloud.
Oh.
I thought, well, even so, that's okay, because my data is backed up. I back up my data. No, not quite, because the data program, the software backup program I had, where data specific to a program was to be backed up, one had to specifically tell, so to speak, the backup software to do that. Well, guess who didn't know that or do it? Moi. Yeah. So that was another problem. And then I thought, okay, God, I'm really between a rock and a hard place. I mean, I did have some hard copy, okay, because I'm still paranoid enough sometimes to keep things in hard copy. But then as it worked out, by some almost miracle, I was able to transfer, my hard drive was working well enough, so I was able to transfer my data off my hard drive onto a thumbnail drive. And miracle of miracle, this is the tax data, and it worked perfectly.
Okay.
But that's a for instance of, it's not always perfect, and it can be kind of scary at times, and it can be a real roller coaster ride for sure.
Right. So the key message there, I think, is to have the infrastructure, particularly the technical support, to make sure it runs smoothly. Otherwise, I mean, this morning, I had problems with Zoom, and then I had problem with another platform that we were using. So whereby a European one that I had as a backup for Zoom, and then eventually we had to resolve it on Skype. So it's rare everything runs smoothly, right? So okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
So I think it's a matter of what they call redundancies. Like I would never work with just one computer in my office. I have 3.
Yeah.
One of them, admittedly, is just for personal. So the other thing is I do not believe in mixing personal matters with business matters. So I have one computer, I'm kind of pointing to it. I don't know if you can see it that way. That's strictly personal. And then I have 2 that are for business, one of which, in my configuration, is a laptop. That's actually what I'm working with you on right now, because the hard drive basically failed on my desktop. So that's down now until I can get it replaced. And because I'm asking for a rather specialized configuration, that's not going to be ready until the middle of the month. And even when it's ready, that has to go to a third party who's going to process the computer to get it ready to work with my firm's systems.
Yeah.
So there's a little, again, redundancy. I will, like a lot of us, I think I do a lot of scanning of documents, because when I get a document, if it's not digital, I make it digital.
Absolutely.
Because basically I do store things digitally. And by the way, so as to not scare people, my data, it's really a firm requirement. That goes out, my work data goes out to the cloud, like boom, like that. And if it's not there, I hear about it from my IT people, and justifiably so, because data that's kept on a hard drive is always at risk of a hard drive failure. I mean, there are things like, I think there's a few, what would I call them? Non-professional level backup systems that are available in the cloud, but we have one that's very much proprietary, because we have security concerns, because we're a law firm, and we have to meet certain special security standards. I know I'm muttering on and going really fast here, but when you work with certain clients, they make you, and justifiably so, adhere to certain security standards for their data. I mean, imagine if you're working, not that we have too many of them, but if I had like a Fortune 500 client and their data got out and it could actually move a market one way or the other, that would not be good. Yes. So we really have to protect client data like crazy. So the situation I was talking about with the tax data, I do stuff that way, but it's not, I would never do a big company that way. That would have to be a whole different level of security. These tend to be more mom and pops, not that they don't deserve protection, not that they aren't protected, but it's, the level of protection you give to anything, I think, by encryption. Really, it kind of depends. And what I've always heard, Derren, about encryption is that if they want it bad enough, they being the hackers of the world, they can get it from almost everybody or anybody. Anything that's out there that you and I, or even through a very strong third-party cloud storage system, it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable. So it's a matter of the hackers will go, that let's hack the point of least vulnerability, which tends to be more the consumer level stuff. So, we don't worry about it too much. We do what we can do. We're not the Department of Defense. God only knows what kind of security you need for things like nuclear weapons codes. That's frightening. And to get a little more wonky on you, and I know you didn't ask all this, but you kind of got me, and I can get wonky. There is something being developed now called quantum computing.
I've heard of that.
I don't know if you've heard of it. It's okay. It's very much an experimental stage. I'm not going to try to explain it technically because I'm not a physicist, and it really gets to that level. But one of the things, the way the data is encrypted, from what I understand, is that conventional, what they call them classical computers, cannot really factor huge numbers. They just can't in any kind of time. That makes maybe take 20 zillion years to do it, to crack a really difficult code. So that's the protection now. But if quantum computers, this is going to sound really wacky to everybody listening, if they can develop them to the point where they're sufficiently, they work on something called qubits, just to throw out a term. If they can get a sufficient number of qubits working in harmony to crack codes, and they do have algorithms to do this, it's just that they don't have the hardware yet to run them on, they'll be able to, almost anything will be vulnerable. If and when, and this is a big if, this is like the land of sci-fi, if the technology gets to the point where quantum computers are really workable, then we're going to have to change all of our security systems for everything. So again, you asked me what's going to happen next year, and all of a sudden I'm saying, well, that's kind of fun. Let's go out, and I don't know how many years, 5, 10, 15, 20, 50. It gets very speculative, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's interesting times.
Okay, that's great. So, I think in terms of the technology piece, the need for support, redundancy, adequate security, especially with professional services dealing with confidential client data. These are all very important support mechanisms that need to be in play. But I think the message is really a positive one, because so many in my ecosystem, within my network, are a bit uncertain with where we are right now and where we may be heading. And just the fact that your practice, your firm exists now and has existed for a long time, living this reality, I think in and itself, it's a case study. It is a message of reassurance. That's what I feel. That's what I feel.
Sure. Well, thanks. Yeah, I agree with all that. It has its challenges, but I do think that we're onto something, but it's not anything that we invented. We were maybe one of the earlier adapters of it, and I think that if we're talking market, then the market is going to kind of move in this direction. There are still, there's still all the challenges to it, Derren, because kind of the other side of this technology, there's a couple of sides of it. Number one, and you know of it because we're kind of tax guys. The old standards for tax nexus are just crumbling.
Yeah.
Because you don't need boots on the ground or a physical plant or anything to really have a digital presence in another taxing jurisdiction. And frankly, and I'll just say this, I'm old, I can get away with it.
Oops, frozen again.
Now you're back. Can you see me?
Sorry. Yeah, I can see you now. Sorry about that. I think it's my Wi-Fi. No, I lost you at the point where you said you want to share something, and you can get away with it.
Oh, okay. I hope I can get away with it. No, and this is not going to be a rev. Oh, so we were talking about taxation, and call it whatever kind of tax you want, income tax, call it sales tax, call it VAT. The terms obviously vary. I'm sure you have different terms in Hong Kong that are not even in English. But the point being that a lot of jurisdictions are finding, and probably on an equitable basis too, not unfairly. Some are probably overreaching, of course, that the tax transactions that classically wouldn't have been subject to income tax, they now are seeking ways to make them subject to income tax. Call it the digital tax, for lack of a better term. That's all over the place. And I think there's something to it. It's a very difficult problem, I think, to figure out. It is one that's been created by technology. But there should be, just speaking airy-fairy, some sort of equitable way. We have a multinational, U.S.-based or based Singapore-based anywhere, that is making, considerable revenue in other countries. There probably should be a way to fairly apportion, and the trick is what's fair, that income tax burden among the various jurisdictions involved. Classically, if I was a computer company, I would set up something where I would be, maybe an Irish subsidiary. The classic thing that there was something called the double Dutch with an Irish middle layer, and it was really a way that clever companies that were well advised and operating perfectly within the law could essentially pay no tax on IP, and IP is it's so portable, it's not even funny. So IP was like water. Water tends to go down. Well, business tends to, if it can, naturally seek the lowest level of taxation, and that's legitimate. But probably the issue was that the taxation system then in existence left, let's call them huge loopholes, that when viewed from the prism of 2020 were probably did not impose proper taxation on some of these companies. So that's a huge challenge now. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, and that ties back into where we started in this conversation with teams working remotely. So like once upon a time, the entire team may have been in Manhattan or in Singapore. And now as we work remotely, maybe a member of the team is in Malaysia, or maybe the member of the New York team is in Jersey or Philly or somewhere else. And then,
absolutely.
And then that creates challenges for the firm as well, or new concerns or opportunities for people like us to get involved to help on the advisory and on the tail side on compliance as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. We had a lot of that here because we have quite a border with Canada and quite a border with Mexico. So, I mean, the classic case, I don't know how much you know about U.S. geography, but I'm from upstate New York, and I used to go to Canada a lot. It was no big deal to go to Canada. We were literally 60 or 70 miles from the Canadian border, and if I could swim, it was like 40 miles across Lake Ontario. The point being, so then when COVID struck, lots of people were literally living in the United States or vice versa, living in Canada, right on the border, and moving over the border, and they were working in the other jurisdiction. When COVID hit, then these people could no longer, for lots of reasons, cross the Niagara Falls Bridge, they call it the Rainbow Bridge, over into Canada, for example. So they would then be working from the U.S., but for a Canadian company. How was that going to be taxed? Yeah. They had to work out, well, is it a temporary situation created just by COVID, or is it something more permanent? And part of what you and I were talking about is, well, what happens in the long run? And maybe, this isn't so temporary, and people are going to be, doing more. Like that situation I talked about, someone in Niagara Falls, United States, is going to be at least a few days a week, even though they're working for a Canadian company in Niagara Falls, Canada, doing it from the U.S. And then how do you treat that? So a lot of the challenges are just really, how does the law keep up with the unbelievably quick pace of change that's going on in society, that's going on in technology. It's a huge challenge, but I think it's probably a good challenge because other than COVID, I mean, that's a bad thing, but most of this is being driven by human progress.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even COVID, again, the silver lining in the cloud, this may force us to rethink things too because of this challenge. Maybe we get better systems for developing vaccines. There's a huge, and Darren, there's a huge social problem in the U.S. Let's not cover that one over for half a second.
Yeah.
And certainly, African Americans, the poor elements of society, not just African Americans, but just all the things that have been going on here with that.
Yeah.
I think somewhat exacerbated by a few things. One is probably the leadership, frankly. Another one is that the disease has just highlighted some of the inequities.
Yeah.
So, we're very much challenged here and maybe in the rest of the world too. I don't know about the rest of the world. How do we deal with these? How do we get more uniform health care? Because COVID, frankly, has affected, no surprise, the disadvantaged people that don't have the access or the means to pay for the health care.
Yeah.
And this is, again, we're getting to social issues. But there's a lot of challenges, a lot of problems, really, and it's can good leadership do it? Well, probably not in and of itself, but would probably help. That's my sense, without getting too political about it. So we have elections coming up here. We'll see what those do. Again, this isn't supposed to be a political platform, I know, so I don't want to get too much into that.
Great. So I think. I like the way you look for the silver lining, and at the end of the day, I think this is it could be a positive step in our evolution, not just as a society, but in terms of business, in terms of commerce, the way we get things done.
Yeah, absolutely, and so I think there may be a social element to it too, because again, without getting into a lot of detail, and I'll talk around the issue. We've had a long period of a lot of inequality for lots of the wrong reasons, and a lot. It's kind of easy, really, when you're from a more privileged, let's say, background, and haven't been exposed to a lot of different things and have been raised in a certain way almost. It seeps into people. Even unconsciously. So, all of us have work to do.
Absolutely.
On a lot of issues personally, and to reach out and understand other people. So again, if there's another silver lining in this, it may be that we're going to see some social progress and more gender equality, more racial equality, less religious discrimination, all these horrible things that unfortunately are still very much with us.
Yeah.
Maybe this will help us. I don't think you don't take it from level 1 to level 10,000. It's an evolution, but I think things have moved a little slower for a long time than they probably should have on a lot of fronts. So again, to the extent that this is somewhat of a catalyst, it could be a good thing. We'll see. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball.
We'll see. We'll definitely see, Robert. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your experience and your insight with whoever's listening.
Well, it's a pleasure and an honor, Derren. I really, it makes me feel really good and sort of almost like a chosen one in a way that you're talking to me. So I feel honored and privileged.
Thank you.